Hello. Today I'm going to read to you the story Houseboat from Anais Nin's collection of short stories called Under a Glass Bell, published in 1947 by Swallow Press. Alright. The Houseboat. The current of the crowd wanted to sweep me along with it. The green lights on the street corners ordered me to cross in the street. The policeman smiled to invite me to walk between the silver-headed nails. Even the autumn leaves obeyed the current, but I broke away from it like a fallen piece. I swerved out and stood at the top of the stairs leading down to the quays. Below me flowed the river, not like the current I had just broken from, made of dissonant pieces colliding rustily, driven by hunger and desire. Down the stairs I ran towards the waterfront, the noises of the city receding as I descended, the leaves retreating to the corner of the steps under the wind of my skirt. At the bottom of the stairs lay the wrecked mariners of the street current, the tramps who had fallen out of the crowd life, who refused to obey. Like me, at some point of the trajectory, they had all fallen out, and here they lay shipwrecked at the foot of the trees, sleeping and drinking. They had abandoned time, possessions, labor, slavery. They walked and slept in counter-rhythm to the world. They renounced houses and clothes. They sat alone, but not unique, for they all seemed to have been born brothers. Time and exposure made their clothes alike. Wine and air gave them the same eroded skin. The crust of dirt, the swollen noses, the stale tears in the eyes, all gave them the same appearance. Having refused to follow the procession of the streets, they sought the river which lulled them. Wine and water. Every day in front of the river they reenacted the ritual of abandon. Against the knots of rebellion, wine and the river, against the cutting iron of loneliness, wine and water washing away everything in a rhythm of blurred silences. They threw the newspapers into the river, and this was their prayer, to be carried, lifted, borne down, without feeling the hard bone of pain in man, lodged in his skeleton, but only the pulse of flowing blood. No shocks, no violence, no awakening. While the tramps slept, the fishermen in a trance pretended to be capturing fish and stood there hypnotized for hours. The river communicated with them through the bamboo rods of their fishing tackle, transmitting its vibrations. Hunger and time were forgotten. The perpetual waltz of lights and shadows emptied one of all memories and terrors. Fishermen, tramps, filled by the brilliance of the river as by an anesthetic which permitted only the pulse to beat, emptied of memories as in dancing. The houseboat was tied at the foot of the stairs. Broad and heavy on its keel, stained with patches of lights and shadows, bathing in reflections, it heaved now and then to the pressure of a deeper breathing of the river. The water washed its flanks lingeringly, the moss gathered around the base of it, just below the waterline, and swayed like naiad hair, then folded back again in silky adherence to the wood. The shutters opened and closed in obedience to the gusts of wind, and the heavy poles which kept the barge from touching the shore cracked with the strain like bones. A shiver passed along the houseboat asleep on the river, like a shiver of fever in a dream. The lights and shadows stopped waltzing. The nose of the houseboat plunged deeper and shook its chains. A moment of anguish. Everything was slipping into anger again, as on earth. But no, the water dream persisted. Nothing was displaced. The nightmare might appear here, but the river knew the mystery of continuity. Continuity. A fit of anger, and only the surface erupted, leaving the deep flowing body of the dream intact. The noises of the city receded completely as I stepped onto the gangplank. As I took out the key, I felt nervous. If the key fell into the river, the key to the little door to my life into the infinite. Or what if the houseboat broke its moorings and floated away? It had done this once already, breaking the chain at the prow, and the tramps helped to swing it back in place. As soon as I was inside of the houseboat, I no longer knew the name of the river or the city. Once inside the walls of old wood, under the heavy beams, I might be inside a Norwegian sailing ship traversing fjords, and a Dutch boyer sailing to Bali, a jute boat on the Brahmaputra. At night the lights on the shore were those of Constantinople or the Neva. The giant bells ringing the hours were those of the sunken cathedral. Every time I inserted the key into the lock, I felt this snapping of cords, this lifting of anchor, this fever of departure. Once inside the houseboat, all the voyages began. Even at night with its shutters closed, no smoke coming out of its chimney, asleep and secret, it had an air of mysteriously sailing somewhere. At night I closed the windows which overlooked the quays. As I leaned over, I could see dark shadows passing by, men with their collars turned up and their caps pushed over their eyes, women with wide long skirts, market women who made love with the tramps behind the trees. The street lamps high above threw no light on the trees and bushes along the big wall. It was only when the window rustled that the shadows, which seemed to be one shadow, split into two swiftly, and then, in the silence, melted into one again. At this moment a barge full of coal passed by, sent waves rolling behind it, upheaving all the other barges. The pictures on the walls swayed. The fishing net hung on the ceiling like a giant spider web swung, gently rocking a seashell and a starfish caught in its meshes. On the table lay a revolver. No harm could come to me on the water, but someone had laid a revolver there, believing I might need it. I looked at it as if it reminded me of a crime I had committed, with an irrepressible smile such as rises sometimes to people's lips in the face of great catastrophes which are beyond their grasp. The smile which comes at times on certain women's faces while they are saying they regret the harm they have done. It is the smile of nature quietly and proudly asserting its natural right to kill, the smile which the animal in the jungle never shows, but by which man reveals when the animal re-enters his being and reasserts its presence. This smile came to me as I took up the revolver and pointed it out of the window, into the river. But I was so averse to killing that even shooting into the water I felt uneasy, as if I might kill the unknown woman of the Seine again, the woman who had drowned herself here years ago and who was so beautiful that at the morgue they had taken a plaster cast of her face. The shot came faster than I had expected. The river swallowed it. No one noticed it, not from the bridge, not from the quays. How easily a crime could be committed here. Outside an old man was playing the violin feverishly, but no sound came out of it. He was deaf. No music poured from his instrument, no music, but tiny plaintive cries escaped with trembling gestures. At the top of the stairs 2 policemen were chatting with the prostitutes. The windows overlooking the quays now shut, the barge looked uninhabited, but the windows looking on the river were open. The dying summer breath entered into my bedroom, the room of shadows, the bower of the night. Heavy beams overhead, low ceilings, a heavy wooden sideboard along the walls. An Indian lamp threw charcoal patterns over walls and ceiling, a Persian design of cactus flowers, lace fans, palm leaves, a Lamaist Vajri mandala flower, minarets, trellises. When I lie down to dream, it is not merely a dust flower born like a rose out of the desert sands and destroyed by a gust of wind. When I lie down to dream, it is to plant the seed for the miracle and the fulfillment. The headboard opened like a fan over my head, a peacock feather opening in dark wood and copper threads. The wings of a great golden bird kept afloat on the river. The barge could sink, but not this heavy, wide bed, traveling throughout the night spread over the deepest precipices of desire. Falling on it, I felt the waves of emotion which sustained me, the constant wave of emotion under my feet, burrowing myself into the bed only to spread fan-wise and float into a moss-carpeted tunnel of caresses. The incense was spiraling, the candles were burning with delicate oscillations of anguish. Watching them was like listening to a beloved heartbeat and fearing the golden hammer strokes might stop. The candles never conquered the darkness, but maintained a disquieting duel with the night. I heard a sound on the river, but when I leaned out of the window, the river had become silent again. Now I heard the sound of oars, softly, softly, coming from the shore. A boat knocked against the barge. There was a sound of chains being tied. I await the phantom lover, the one who haunts all women, the one who I dreamed of, who stand behind every man, with a finger and head shaking. Not him, he's not the one, forbidding me each time to love. The houseboat must have traveled during the night. The climate and the scenery were changed. Dawn was accelerated by a woman's shrieks, shrieks interrupted by the sound of choking. I ran on deck. I arrived just as the woman who was drowning grasped the anchor's chain. Her shrieks grew worse as she felt nearer salvation, her appetite for life growing more violent. With the help of one of the drunken tramps, we pulled the chain up with the woman clinging to it. She was hiccuping, spitting, choking. The drunken tramp was shouting orders to imaginary sailors, telling them what to do for the drowned. Leaning over the woman, he almost toppled over her, which reawakened her aggressiveness and helped her to rise and walk into the barge where we changed her clothes. The barge was traversing a dissonant climate. The mud had come to the surface of the river, and a shoal of corks surrounded the barge. We pushed them away with brooms and poles. The corks seemed to catch the current and floated away, only to encircle the barge magnetically. The tramps were washing themselves at the fountain. Bare to the waist, they soaked their faces and shoulders, and then they washed their shirts and combed themselves, dipping their combs in the river. These men at the fountain, they knew what was going to happen. When they saw me on deck, they gave me the news of the day, or the approach of war, or the hope of revolution. I listened to their description of tomorrow's world, and Aurora Borealis and all men out of prison. the oldest tramp of all, who did not know about tomorrow. He was in the prison of his own drunkenness. No escape. When he was filled like a barrel, then his legs gave way and he could only fall down. When he was lifted by alcoholic wings and ready for flight, the wings collapsed into nausea. This gangplank of drunkenness led nowhere. The same day, at this post of anguish, 3 men quarreled on the quays. One carried a rag-picker's bag over his shoulder. The second was brilliantly elegant. The third was a beggar with a wooden leg. They argued excitedly. The elegant one was counting out money. He dropped a 10-franc piece. The beggar placed his wooden leg on it and would not budge. No one could frighten him, and no one dared to push off the wooden leg. He kept it there all the time they argued. Only when the 2 others went off did he lean over to pick it up. The street cleaner was sweeping the dead leaves into the river. The rain fell into the cracked letter box, and when I opened my letters it looked as if my friends had been weeping when writing me. A child sat on the edge of the river, his thin legs dangling. He sat there for 2 or 3 hours and then began to cry. The street cleaner asked him what was the matter. His mother had told him to wait there until she returned. She had left him a piece of dry bread. He was wearing his little black school apron. The street cleaner took his comb, dipped it in the river, and combed the child's hair and washed his face. I offered to take him on the barge. The street cleaner said, "She'll never come back. That's how they do it. Here's another one for the orphanage." When the child heard the word orphanage, he ran away so fast the street cleaner did not have time to drop his broom. He shrugged his shoulders. "They'll catch him sooner or later. I was one of them." Voyage of Despair. The river was having a nightmare. Its vast whaleback was restless. It had been cheated of its daily suicide. More women fed the river than men. More wanted to die in the winter than in summer. Parasitic corks obeyed every undulation, but did not separate from the barge, glued like waves of mercury. When it rained, the water seeped through the top room and fell on my bed, on my books, on the black rug. I awakened in the middle of the night with wet hair. I thought I must be at the bottom of the Seine, that the barge, the bed, had quietly sunk during the night. It was not very different to look through water at all things. It was like weeping cool, saltless tears without pain. I was not cut off altogether, but in so deep a region that every element was marrying in sparkling silence, so deep that I heard the music of the spinet inside the snail who carries his antenna like an organ and travels on the back of a harp fish. In this silence and white communion took place the convolutions of plants turning into flesh, into planets. The towers were pierced by swordfishes, the moon of citron rotated on a sky of lava, the branches had thirsty eyes hanging like berries. Tiny birds sat on weeds asking for no food and singing no song but the soft chant of metamorphosis, and each time they opened their beaks the webbed stained glass windows decomposed into snakes and ribbons of sulphur. The light filtered through the slabs of mildewed tombs, and no eyelashes could close against it. No tears could blur it. No eyelids could curtain it off. No sleep could dissolve it. No forgetfulness could deliver one from this place where there was neither night nor day. Fish, plant, woman, equally aware, with eyes forever open, confounded and confused in communion, in an ecstasy without repose. I ceased breathing in the present, inhaling the hair around me into the leather urns of the lungs. I breathed out into the infinite, exhaling the mist of a 3/4 tone breath, a light pyramid of heartbeats. This breathing lighter than breathing, without pressure from the wind, like the windless delicacy of the air in Chinese paintings, supported one winged blackbird, one breathless cloud, bowing one branch, preceded the white hysteria of the poet and the red-foamed hysteria of woman. When this inhaling of particles of dust grains, of rust microbes, of all the ashes of past death ceased, I inhaled the air from the unborn and felt my body like a silk scarf resting outside the blue rim of the nerves. The body recovered the calm of minerals, its plant juices, the eyes became gems again, made to glitter alone and not for the shedding of tears. Sleep. No need to watch the pale flame of my life in the palm of my hand, this flame as pale as the Holy Ghost speaking in many languages to which none have the secret. The dream will watch over it. No need to remain with eyes wide open. Now the eyes are gems, the hair a fan of lace. Sleep is upon me. The pulp of roots, the milk of cactus, the quicksilver drippings of the silver beaches is in my veins. I sleep with my feet on moss carpets, my branches in the cotton of the clouds. The sleep of 100 years has transfixed all into the silver face of ecstasy. During the night, the houseboat traveled out of the landscape of despair. Sunlight struck the wooden beams, and the reflected light of the water danced on the wooden beams. Opening my eyes, I saw the light playing around me, and I felt as if I were looking through a pierced sky into some region far nearer to the sun. Where had the houseboat sailed to during the night? The island of joy must be near. I leaned out of the window. The moss costume of the houseboat was greener, washed by cleaner waters. The corks were gone, and the smell of rancid wine. The little waves passed with great precipitation. The waves were so clear I could see the roots of the indolent algae plants that had grown near the edge of the river. This day I landed at the island of joy. I could now put my neck around the seashell necklace and walk through the city with the arrogance of my secret. When I returned to the houseboat with my arms loaded with new candles, wine, ink, writing paper, nails for the broken shutters, the policeman stopped me at the top of the stairs. "Is there a holiday at the quay?" "A holiday? No." As I ran down the stairs, I understood. There was a holiday on the quay. The policeman had seen it on my face. A celebration of lights and motion. Confetti of sunspots, serpentines of water currents, music from the deaf violinist. It was the island of joy I had touched in the morning. The river and I united in a long, winding, never-ending dream with its deep undercurrents, its deeper undertows of dark activity, the river and I rejoicing at teeming obscure mysteries of river-bottom lives. The big clock of the sunken cathedral rang 12 times for the feast. Barges passed slowly in the sun like festive chariots throwing bouquets of lightning from their highly polished knobs. The laundry in blue, white, and rose hung out to dry and waving like flags, children playing with cats and dogs, women holding the rudder with serenity and gravity, everything washed clean with water and light passing at a dream pace. But when I reached the bottom of the stairs, the festivity came to an abrupt end. 3 men were cutting the algae plants with long scythes. I shouted, but they worked on unconcerned, pushing them all away so that the current would sweep them off. The men laughed at my anger. One man said, "These are not your plants. Cleaning department order. Go and complain to them." And with quicker gestures they cut all the algae and fed the limp green carpet to the current. So passed the barge out of the island of joy. One morning what I found in the letter box was an order from the river police to move on. The King of England was expected for a visit, and he would not like the sight of the houseboats, the laundry exposed on the decks, the chimneys and water tanks in rusty colors, the gangplanks with teeth missing, and other human flowers born of poverty and laziness. We were all ordered to sail on, quite a way up the Seine, and no one knew quite where because it was all in technical language. One of my neighbors, a one-eyed cyclist, came to discuss the dispossessions and to invoke laws which had not been made to give houseboats the right to lie in the heart of Paris gathering moss. The fat painter who lived across the river, open-shirted and always perspiring, came to discuss the matter and to suggest we do not move at all as a form of protest. What could happen? At the worst, since there were no laws against our saying, the police would have to fetch a tugboat and move us all in a line like a row of prisoners. That was the worst that could happen to us. But the one-eyed cyclist was overcome by this threat because he said his houseboat was not strong enough to bear the strain of being pulled between other heavier, larger barges. He had heard of a small houseboat being wrenched apart in such a voyage. He did not think mine would stand the strain either. The next day the one-eyed man was towed along by a friend who ran one of the tourist steamers. He left at dawn like a thief, with his fear of collective moving. Then the fat painter moved, pulled heavily and slowly because his barge was the heaviest. He owned a piano and huge canvases, heavier than coal. His leaving left a vast hole in the alignment of barges, like a tooth missing. The fishermen crowded in this open space to fish and rejoice. They had been wishing us away, and I believe it was their prayers which were heard rather than ours, for soon the letters from the police became more insistent. I was the last one left, still believing I would be allowed to stay. Every morning I went to see the chief of police. I always believed an exception would be made for me, that laws and regulations broke down for me. I don't know why, except that I had seen it happen very often. The chief of police was extremely hospitable. He permitted me to sit in his office for hours and gave me pamphlets to pass the time. I became versed in the history of the Seine. I knew the number of sunken barges, collided Sunday tourist steamboats, of people saved from suicide by the river police. But the law remained adamant, and the advice of the chief of police, on the sly, was for me to take my houseboat to a repair yard near Paris, where I could have a few repairs made while waiting for permission to return. The yard being near Paris, I made arrangements for a tugboat to come for me in the middle of the day. The tugboat's approach to the barge was very much like a courtship, made with great care and many cork protectors. The tugboat knew the fragility of these discarded barges converted into houseboats. The wife of the tugboat captain was cooking lunch while the maneuvers were carried out. The sailboats were untying the ropes. One was stoking the fire. The sailors were untying the ropes. One was stoking the fire. When the tugboat and the barge were tied together like twins, the captain lifted the gangplank, opened his bottle of red wine, drank a very full gulp, and gave orders for departure. Now we were gliding along. I was running all over the houseboat, celebrating the strangest sensation I'd ever known, this traveling along a river with all my possessions around me, my books, my diaries, my furniture, my pictures, my clothes in the closet. I leaned out of each little window to watch the landscape. I lay on the bed. It was a dream. It was a dream, this being a marine snail traveling with one's house all around one's neck. A marine snail gliding through the familiar city. Only in a dream could I move so gently along with the small human heartbeat in rhythm with the tug-tug heartbeat of the tugboat, and Paris unfolding, uncurling in beautiful undulations. The tugboat pulled its smokestacks down to pass under the first bridge. The captain's wife was serving lunch on deck. Then I discovered with anxiety that the barge was taking in water. It had already seeped through the floor. I began to work the pumps, but I could not keep abreast of the leaks. Then I filled pails, pots, and pans, and I still could not control the water, so I called out to the captain. He laughed. He said, "We'll have to slow down a bit," and he did. The dream rolled on again. We passed under a second bridge with the tugboat bowing down like a salute, past all the houses I had lived in. From so many of these windows I had looked with envy and sadness at the flowing river and passing barges. Today I was free and traveling with my bed and my books. I was dreaming and flowing along with the river, pouring water out with pails, but this was a dream and I was free. Now it was raining. I smelled the captain's lunch and I picked up a banana. The captain shouted, "Go on deck and say where it is you want to stop." I sat on deck under an umbrella, eating the banana and watching the course of the voyage. We were out of Paris, in that part of the Seine where the Parisians swim in canoe. We were traveling past the Bois de Boulogne, through the exclusive region where only the small yachts were allowed to anchor. We passed another bridge and reached a factory section. Discarded barges were lying on the edge of the water. The boatyard was an old barge surrounded with rotting skeletons of barges, piles of wood, rusty anchors, and pierced water tanks. One barge was turned upside down, and the windows hung half-wrenched on the side. We were towed alongside and told to tie up against the guardian barge, that the old man and woman would watch mine until the boss came to see what repairing had to be done. My Noah's Ark had arrived safely, but I felt as if I were bringing an old horse to the slaughterhouse. The old man and woman who were the keepers of the cemetery had turned their cabin into a complete concierge's lodge to remind themselves of their ancient bourgeois splendor. An oil lamp, a tile stove, elaborate sideboards, lace on the back of the chairs, fringes and tassels on the curtains, a Swiss clock, many photographs, bric-a-brac, all the tokens of their former life on earth. Every now and then the police came to see if the roof was done. The truth was that more pieces of tin and wood the boss nailed to the roof, the more the rain came in. It fell on my dresses and trickled into my shoes and my books. The policeman was invited to witness this because he suspected the length of my stay. Meanwhile, the King of England had returned home, but no law was made to permit our return. The one-eyed man made a daring entry back and was expelled the very next day. The fat painter returned to his spot before the Gare d'Orsay. His brother was a deputy. So passed the barge into exile. Thank you.